and we're going to start talking about preparing courses for flexibility. Now, again, pulling back the curtain just a quick sec, I am going to use a timer so that I don't lose track of how much time I have to give a presentation, so that I have time for activities. When we have a focused amount of time, let's say in this case 90 minutes, but in most cases a Tuesday, Thursday class is about 75 minutes of time, and a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class is usually around 45 or 50 minutes of time. You have to use those minutes judiciously. You may need to take extra time to explain things. And so we're going to cover these in more detail as we go through the different modules, but I wanted to let you know that I'm setting a timer for myself so I don't lose track, ramble on as I might do once in a blue moon, and lose some valuable time that we could be spending on an activity. Again, feel free to use the chat to share any questions or ideas. This is specific to you and your needs. So even though I've put together what I consider to be the most amazing information on the planet, I want to make sure it's what you need and not what I think you need. All right. Okay, so in this particular micro lesson, we're going to look at how we can design course level outcomes to be more flexible, and how we can use a backward design approach to help us prepare the course for student achievement, for student success. We're doing this mainly because I consider outcomes to be the nucleus of a course. We construct the course around what we want students to be able to do. And we want to make sure that how we've constructed the course supports flexibility to the biggest extent. Beverly, I see your question. It's because you're enrolled as an observer from the DAT. And so Shady, who's here in the room, maybe can switch your role from observer to student so that we can knock that out and allow you to participate to the full extent of the law. All right, back to business. Again, we're going to explore some strategies, and then we're going to complete a brief activity. So in the chat, please let me know if you have A, used backward design processes, B, heard of backward design processes, or C, never heard of it. Please tell me more. We have a couple of C nevers, and the large quantity, I would say 92.7%, using my analytical skills of things flying through the chat, have been using backward design. For the benefit of those who have not, and we want to accept that there are people in the asynchronous land, hey, everybody out there watching the recording, who may skew those results, right? So backward design really is thinking through how we put our courses together. A forward course design might be, we start with the course content, like a textbook, then figure out what activities we want students to complete, and then how we want them to demonstrate that they've met the outcomes in some way. In a backward design process, we start with the outcomes. We identify how students will show what they know from there. Then we plan how students will practice and prepare with engagement and different individual activities. And last but not least, we determine which materials, which content will help students reach those learning outcomes the best. That's what we mean by backward design, and that's how we're going to go through this entire 4-module series. So it really does start with outcomes. And if you're participating in a live setting, I'll give you a minute to maybe go find the outcomes from your own class. Or if you're watching via Zoom, same thing. Pull up a digital or printed file that has some of your course outcomes on it. We might as well use this time, be practical, right? If you're watching the recording, it's okay to press pause, go get your outcomes, and come back. So while you all do that, many of us are aware or have experience with writing or rewriting our outcomes. These could be course level outcomes that you put in your syllabus. And if you zoom in, they could be module level outcomes that we complete every week. And I'm a big fan of module level outcomes because they help students track their progress over time. Janae, thanks for the roundabout design. The article was a good one, pretty recent. So if we zoom out from the course level, we could also have program level outcomes for our major or field or discipline. And if we zoom way out, we could have institution level outcomes that we ask every student to master before they earn their degree. And at the highest level, you have groups like AAC&U with their essential learning outcomes that entire states like Utah adopt across the state. So when we design our courses, we're reviewing outcomes for clarity, measurability, hopefully equity, and so on. In this micro lesson, we are going to look at them mainly about how they support flexibility. So you might be asking yourselves, what does it mean to have an outcome that increases flexibility? Well, we need to look at any indicators in the outcome itself that refer to time, space, any products that students generate, or who's going to participate and how many people participate in those activities. Some examples that I drew from a couple different sources, and they're cited in the Canvas space. We've got some before and after examples that are less flexible and more flexible. On the left, you see students will be able to demonstrate on a mannequin the 4 steps to administer CPR. And to make that more flexible, if we're having students learn over distance, they may not have access to a mannequin where they are. Are they still able to demonstrate the 4 steps used to administer CPR without a mannequin? So that could be a potential way to make that outcome more flexible, or at least an outcome that supports greater flexibility for the student. Another example from Brian Beatty's book about hybrid flexible courses, students will participate in a face-to-face small group discussion. And that might be a module level outcome. So changing that simply to students will participate in a small group discussion removes that barrier that students have to be in the same space. So your mission, should you choose to accept it, activity for this micro lesson is to engage in this process. You can use the backward design worksheet that I've created, or you can just type on your own computer some of your outcomes that you're already using and rewrite them if they need to be made more flexible. They may be very flexible as they are, and share them in the chat where you can copy and paste them into the activity 1.1 discussion later on today, or just keep it to yourself, whatever is the most helpful. If you're using the backward design worksheet, when you download it, you'll see that there are 4 columns. We're going to reuse this worksheet throughout this 4-module series. Today, we'll focus on the first column, where we look at the specific outcomes and how to make them stronger with respect to flexibility. For module 2, we'll talk about assessment strategies. In module 3, we'll talk about engagement strategies or the activities we ask students to complete. And then in module 4, we'll talk about content review strategies. If you are gangbusters and you want to start thinking about flexibility in all of those different areas, you're welcome to do so, but we are going to cover them again later, and I'll give you prompts for that. So if you're in the room with me, right now I see my cat, so my cat is going to participate. You can go ahead and grab a few minutes to work out 1 or 2 outcomes, and then those of you who are in real time but online can do the same, and then we'll take a few minutes to discuss. If you're watching the recording, press pause and complete the first column of the worksheet, and when you're finished, come back and press play, and you'll hear our brief conversation that we'll finish together online. I see a question about where the flexible design worksheet is. It is located in the Canvas course under activity 1.1. Thanks, Delane, for sharing that. And if people are interested, you can see here, once you finish this reviewing the content, you go to activity 1.1, and there's a link, download the backward design worksheet. And FM Sidlau brings up a good point. It's handy to have links ready to pop in the chat when you're doing a flexible course experience like we're doing now. Oddly enough, I have a lot of links ready, but I didn't have that one ready. So thanks for the little reminder, and we'll make sure that we do that. And someone just suggested in the chat that I might save the Word document as a Google Doc so that people can use it virtually if they don't want to have something on their desktop. Give you another minute or two, and then we'll see what you have to share in the chat. Any outcomes that you've modified to make them more flexible, or outcomes that you already have that promote flexibility in your course. All right. Does anybody have any outcomes they want to share, either verbally or via chat?
Yeah, I'll go.
Please.
What I started to write in my notes is that I found that my outcomes are so vague that they are flexible, but now I realize they're so vague. And I'll give you just one as an example. And we have outcomes for our department, and then in our syllabus, which we're not required to do, we might be more specific about what those outcomes are. Although a lot of us, and Natalie, you might be able to chime in on this too, a lot of us will just stick with our department outcomes for the specific course and not go into more detail. So one of the outcomes is, and this is a short one, organize and carry out elements required to present a radio or TV newscast. So it's very broad and very vague, but it's very flexible. And I don't know, when I wanted to know what your thoughts were about that.
Well, before I give my 2 cents, let's see if anybody in the crowd has anything to suggest.
Well, since Faith called me out, I guess I should. Thanks, Faith. Well, mine are very much the same. I teach French, and it's sort of like demonstrate linguistic skills in these 4 areas, which is very vague. So I have online for each module, I broke down, you will demonstrate these skills verbally this way for this module, reading comprehension in this way for this module. So each module I took the very broad one and I said, specifically for this module, this is how you will do it in these 4 areas. So then I have 4 different assessments for that module, and then I built it backwards. So I still have the very general one for the course, but then I made it more specific for the module. Does that help, Faith?
Yeah, and I think that I probably didn't add what the even broader part of it was: develop written content that's appropriate for specific audiences. So that would be our department module. I mean, I'm sorry, our department outcome. And then I made it more specific, saying carry out elements required to present, blah, blah, blah. But that still isn't saying prepare a TV news script.
And depending on whether or not you wanted to increase flexibility even within the context of the medium, then rather than TV or radio, you might include the appropriate format for the audience, which could include podcast, which could include other ways of communicating. And similarly, Natalie has specific modalities, reading comprehension, writing, and expanding beyond the word essay to explain in writing in whatever format makes most sense. I see Lalita has her hand up, so I will hand the talking stick over to you.
Thank you, Kevin. What I do, I am from engineering. So our program outcomes are also related to the accreditation board outcomes. And then that's why those are so broad. For example, I'll give you, it says that a course outcome is students will be able to use engineering and mathematics principles in this class. Now, what is that supposed to mean? You know, it's so broad, it's everything there. So what I do is I break it down to that course, how I'm going to apply those to that particular course. So those are my course outcomes that are listed on our catalog. And then from that course outcomes, I break it down further to each of my classes. And then particular classes in the sense, even sessions, like I go to chapter wise. Each chapter has 4 outcomes out of that. And then I relate that to our program outcome, to the ABET outcome. ABET means accreditation outcomes and everything. So it relates to that. So again, I use that backward design techniques, what Kevin told. So I go with the outcome, what is the broader umbrella outcome, shorter, and then connect it everything. So each class, each session I teach, I always make it a point that my first slide is I show what are the outcomes of that lecture. So at the end of this lecture, students will be able to do 1, 2, 3 things. And I don't know whether that is flexible enough or that is the debate I'm having with myself. Particularly if some students are going to be in class, and particularly if some students are going to be maybe learning remotely, and maybe, I don't know how our campus, that's what we need to decide on Fresno campus, whether we will allow students to attend asynchronously some of the things. I always recorded my lectures. So whenever I'm teaching, it was all synchronous, but I always made it available afterwards for the students, those who could not make it to the lectures. So I will definitely keep doing that. But I still need to learn like how to make it more flexible or what that exactly means for students' perspective. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you for sharing. And I think it's something that we'll all have to work on. I don't think based on 5 to 10 minutes of a mini lecture, we'll all know exactly how to modify our learning outcomes. Janae asked a question in the chat. I'm noodling around with a learning objective or outcome. Develop research and information literacy skills to inform academic writing. And how could one make something like that more flexible? So again, before I throw in my 2 cents, does anybody have any ideas for Janae?
I'm just kind of learning this for the first time, as most of you all are as well. And I see in the previous example, Kevin, that you took something away that was not flexible, which was the mannequin. And that was like that way of making that more flexible for the modality, I'm guessing. And I'm not sure what other ways to like think about it, but just thought I'd point that out.
Sure. Well, again, it depends on how your outcomes are constructed. And I know some people might have students will work in groups to do X, right? But then if you have some students who are working asynchronously, that may be difficult for them to do. So you may want to give them some flexibility in terms of how they achieve that specific goal. Students will demonstrate X individually or in groups, or just students will demonstrate, period. And so it can be a subtraction, it could be an addition, it could be multiplication, but never division, because I just made that up. Okay, so then with respect to Janae's outcome, I think when we think about information literacy skills, I always harken back to those 8 principles that were in that great EdTech library article. I'll put something in the chat when we have a break. But you might refer to specific skills as opposed to a broad spectrum antibiotic of information literacy skills. And then that might make it easier to make those connections and also construct the flexibility. But as Allison says, information literacy is going to be critical for students who are in flexible course environments because they may be doing more on their own. And we'll talk about that in one of the upcoming micro lessons. So keep the ideas coming. We're going to keep sharing in the Activity 1.1 forum as homework, so to speak. But let's move on to the next micro lesson, unless there are any questions. Megan says, I have very broad course level outcomes too. And I think that's going to be the case, right? We have the outcomes that are in our syllabus and they act like an umbrella. For some instructional designers, they call them terminal outcomes or terminal objectives. And then each week or each module, as we heard Natalie and Faith talk about, you might have what are called enabling outcomes that support the terminal outcome. So if the terminal outcome is, I want students to be able to make a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich, then the enabling outcome is make crispy bacon without burning it, or choose a bacon for the right audience because vegans may need to use tempeh. And so those different outcomes that we write help students make sense of what they're supposed to do that particular week. So those broad course level outcomes can be augmented by different module level or weekly outcomes. I'll finish with the idea of the progress bar. If any of you are familiar with the psychology behind the progress bar, humans in general are satisfied and feel motivated when the progress bar hits 75% or higher. So if we consider our outcomes to be a progress bar for our course, then the course level outcomes, students are not going to be motivated or satisfied till week 12 of a regular semester. So if we give them weekly outcomes, then they're constantly in this smaller loop of satisfaction and motivation to keep going and finishing what they're doing. And we need to consider that for our flexible course design as well. All right, let's move on to our next micro lesson.